Prime Minister says Britain has become indifferent to anti-Semitism and that it poses a profound threat to the nation and its values.
In a statement to mark the second anniversary of the October the 7th Hamas attacks, Keir Starmer warned students who are planning on taking part in protests at universities today that those protests are un-British, saying just because you can doesn't mean you should. Joining us now, Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson. Very good morning to you.
Hello, good morning.
I wonder if you could just explain to the students why you think that the protests are un-British.
Yes, I do believe that protest remains a fundamental right in our country. It's a cornerstone of our democracy. But just because you can protest doesn't mean on every day that you should protest. And 2 years on from the horrific atrocities that we saw in Israel, the worst loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, I would just urge students to pause and reflect on whether today of all days, especially given the appalling terrorist attack we saw in Manchester, whether those protests really need to take place today.
Okay, why don't you ban them?
Because we do have a right in this country, each of us, to protest, but it's a right that we should reflect upon, particularly on days like this. The right to protest is fundamental in our democracy, but students also have a right to be safe on campus, and that's why I'm urging university vice-chancellors to make sure that Jewish students do feel safe on campus, especially given the big reports, the big increases that we've seen in reports of anti-Semitism on campus.
Minister, if you think that they're dangerous, that's a very different thing to saying that they're un-British. You've said that free speech and protest is fundamental British value, but you're now saying that these protests threaten the security of Jewish students on campus. If they are a threat to people's security and safety, surely you should ban them.
Where they are a threat to security and safety, vice-chancellors are able to step in to make sure that students are safe on campus.
So are you urging vice-chancellors to ban them?
I'm urging vice-chancellors to honour their responsibilities to make sure that all students feel safe on campus, and today of all days, that is incredibly important.
OK, I'm just trying to establish, Minister, do you think that these protests in themselves are un-British because they threaten the security of students, which certainly would be an enormous concern? Do you think they're un-British because you're worried about the timing of them and you think it is not British to choose the anniversary of the attacks to stage a protest?
Whenever protests take place, if there are question marks about safety, then yes, university vice-chancellors should step in regardless of which day those protests are taking place on. And of course, the police have responsibilities to make sure that any protests are conducted in line with the law, and they are independent of politicians, but they have those responsibilities. But what I'm saying alongside that is that even where those protests are lawful, I think our British values are also respect for one another, making sure that we have a sense of compassion, a sense of empathy and understanding, that given that we are 2 years on and it's the anniversary of those terrible, terrible events of October the 7th, and especially given the terrorist attack that we saw in Manchester, I would just say to those thinking about taking part in protests, do you really have to do that today of all days? There are 364 other days in the year where you can protest. And that is not to diminish their right to protest about the suffering that they see in Gaza, how they want the war to end, and how they want hostages out and aid in. That's what I want too. But 2 years on from October the 7th, I would just ask people to reflect and to try and think about our shared humanity and our responsibilities to one another, and particularly Jewish people in our country, who today will be feeling a deep sense of mourning and loss and real concern.
Oh, I'm sure that people agree. I mean, certainly the anniversary is a moment to reflect. I'm just not sure whether telling students who want to protest what is happening in Gaza and the level of loss in Gaza will respond to the Prime Minister telling them it's un-British. And I'm just not sure what the definition in that case of un-British is. And if you are saying that they are a threat and a risk, why you don't simply say they are unlawful rather than un-British.
Where they do pose a threat, university vice-chancellors will step in, and of course other protests that are the responsibility of the police to make sure that they are conducted in line with the law. Look, I share that deep sense of anguish and pain about what we see on our television screens, the appalling suffering that we see, including experienced by children in Gaza, which just reinforces the need to get an end to the war, to get more aid into Gaza as an emergent, with a real sense of urgency. And we all want that to happen, and that's what we as a government are pushing to happen. But today of all days, if we could just pause and reflect about where we are, what happened on October the 7th, and just feel that sense of compassion towards one another.
Is it not possible to do the two things at the same time, Minister?
Yeah,
is it not possible to have compassion for the Jewish community and what they have suffered, and also be entitled to exercise a legitimate and lawful right to protest what Israel is doing in Gaza, the Israeli government? Are you suggesting that protesting against Israel in itself is anti-Semitic?
No, and the right to protest in our country is a fundamental right which we all benefit from, which we hold incredibly dear, and it's a cornerstone of our democracy. But just because you have the right to protest does not mean that you should protest every day, including on days like this. And I also feel a deep sense of horror at what I see on my television screens, the suffering of people in Gaza, including children. And that shows why we desperately, desperately need to get more aid in, why we need to see the hostages released and a move towards a two-state solution. We have, of course, as a government, recognised the Palestinian state. We are supporting all of the efforts to move urgently towards an end to the war. That is the right thing to do.
Bridget Phillipson, you're currently fighting a deputy leadership election in the Labour Party against Lucy Powell, who was sacked from the cabinet by Keir Starmer a few weeks ago. Is it an albatross around your neck that in interviews like this, you are always having to defend Keir Starmer and the cabinet line when Lucy Powell is free to say what I think very many Labour Party members will feel, which is protesting against what's happening in Gaza is really important every day of the year?
Well, I am standing to be deputy leader of our party, and the reason I'm doing that is I want to unite the party to beat reform, but I'll also be a strong voice around the cabinet table for members and our movement. That's my track record. That's what I've achieved over the course of the last year as Education Secretary, with a real focus on child poverty, and that will be my #1 priority. But I do believe in working together with my colleagues, in uniting to take the fight to our opponents, because the only people who will benefit from disunity or from having arguments in public are the people that we want to beat in the elections we've got coming up in May and the elections we've got coming up in the general election.
Is there one issue which you'd just like to say now where you think Keir Starmer and the cabinet have been getting it wrong and that you would like to call out that failure?
I think if you look at the record of Angela Rayner, John Prescott, Harriet Harman, brilliant Labour deputy leaders who had a seat at the cabinet table and a role in government alongside being deputy leader, they didn't air the dirty linen in public. They got things done behind the scenes to make change happen. That's what I will do. And I know that one area where members do want to see more is around taking action on child poverty. I've been pushing really hard for that. I fought tooth and nail to expand free school meals to 500,000 more children in our country. That is the kind of impact that I will seek to have, even more, doing even more with a mandate to go further and to do more if members put their trust in me.
Bridget Phillipson, thank you very much indeed.